Hello, welcome back to Readings in Impact Investing. My name is Daniel Rosehill, and this is a YouTube channel and accompanying podcast which I set up in order to make critical reports in the world of impact investing more widely accessible. This podcast is available on Spotify and other podcasting platforms, and you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel or put it on background play to listen to these videos at your convenience. So we're going to be continuing today with Impact Taskforce State of Play 2023. This is a report that was just released this month, at the time I'm recording this, by the ITF, summarising the main updates since their previous report in 2021 and making recommendations for the future as we move towards 2030. Okay, this is entitled Context, Significant Shifts Since 2021, and this is Chapter 1, as I said, just after the executive summary. Our initial question has become even more critical. In 2021, we warned about the glaring gap between rhetoric and delivery on the SDGs and climate goals. We are now 2 years closer to 2030, a key year of accountability, and remain off track. The task has arguably become more challenging. Interconnected shifts in geopolitics, macroeconomics, public policy, and trade have shaped a political context that is more fragmented, volatile, and competitive. Today's context is one of significantly higher inflation, interest rates, and levels of debt. On the other hand, devastating extreme weather events have brought home the human and financial costs of climate change and increased the pressure for climate action on mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. The voice of frustration from the so-called Global South is growing louder and becoming more unified. It is also increasingly clear that we will not achieve our collective climate goals if rich countries that have prospered from fossil fuels do not help rapidly growing EMDEs to find a low-carbon development model. Finance has become a bottleneck at a time when public balance sheets are more stretched than ever. Governments still have significant resources and powerful toolboxes to deploy in support of the SDGs and climate goals, and they need to be more accountable for the impact and prioritisation of their spending. However, we need to confront the reality that there will never be enough public money. We are therefore at a pivotal point in terms of finding a better solution to the question of how to mobilise private capital for impact at scale and to ensure that it flows to where it is most needed. The numbers pose a serious challenge with an estimated annual investment gap of $3.9 trillion in EMDEs. Just when private capital needs to be flowing into EMDEs, emerging markets and developing economies, it is flowing out. Hence the question that we were asked to explore by the G7 presidency in 2021, how can we accelerate the volume and effectiveness of private capital seeking to have a positive social and environmental impact? This question has become more critical than ever. A greater sense of urgency is required from both the public and private sector to reach a more comprehensive solution. Acceptance of the need for financial system reform is growing, but this reform needs to extend beyond DFIs and MDBs. Since 2021, there has been growing consensus about the need to overhaul the financial system to enhance its effectiveness, not least for the Global South, with a focus on reforming international public finance institutions. The Paris Summit for a New Global Financial Pact in June of 2023 convened approximately 100 government representatives, which represented an important landmark. In that context, we have lent our voice to the call for MDBs and DFIs to have clearer mandates and the financial capacity to de-risk assets to mobilise private capital at a larger scale, especially into higher risk, higher impact markets. However, we argue that the private sector also needs to be challenged in this regard. Perspectives on risk tolerance should be re-evaluated in light of the growing systemic risk associated with climate instability, loss of critical natural systems, and the consequences of growing inequality. The wealth management sector in particular needs to evaluate whether screening out risk and doing less harm is good enough. An ESG industry making claims about social responsibility should engage with the growing reputational risk of not investing in EMDEs where the impact upside is greatest and which offer both opportunity and diversification. We note a UNCTAD study of the largest public pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, which suggested that an active impact investment approach was one of the most favoured ESG strategies, despite allocations for emerging markets from those investors remaining small. There is leadership to build on. We welcome evidence of asset owners collaborating to evaluate how their money can help EMDEs transition to low carbon economies, such as the joint initiative by 12 UK pension funds with £400 billion of assets convened by the Church of England Pensions Board. This leadership is not restricted to developed countries. The Kenya Pensions Fund Investment Consortium, supported by the World Bank/IFC Joint Capital Market Programme, acronym JCAP, has brought together 24 member funds and $5 billion of assets to take a new approach to investing in infrastructure and to diversify beyond traditional investments in sovereign instruments. The good news is that we have a decent understanding of the barriers to private investment flows into EMDEs. There is also growing consensus on what action is required to reduce these barriers and adjust risk profiles. Furthermore, we have demonstration effects and evidence of what does work. The creation of new tools or institutions does not seem to be a priority. First of all, we must comprehend the factors that have prevented our progress towards a tipping point of behavioural transformation. It is probable that the answer lies in the weight of system inertia, institutional unreadiness, and bureaucracy in both the public and private sectors. We must acknowledge the need for change in the way that resources are allocated in a global economy facing this level of systemic risk. The finance and investment sectors, arguably our most powerful economic system, takes trillions on the allocation of almost $270 million of global financial wealth, which is expected to grow to almost $330 trillion in the year 2027. Excluding the value of real assets in private hands, that is expected to reach $340 trillion by 2027. Within this, the value of private institutional capital is estimated to be $98 trillion, of which almost 50% represents pension funds in OECD countries. Collectively, over decades, we have created this system of accumulated wealth allocation, and we therefore have the ability and imperative to change it and to redefine the parameters of business and investment success. The technology-empowered generations due to inherit this wealth over the next 25 years will almost certainly demand it. A change agenda needs to be actionable and go with the grain of human nature. The urgency of today's context requires a change agenda that is actionable and goes with the grain of human behaviour and societal shifts. We argue that the key systemic shift is to a future in which measurement of social and environmental impact is integrated into economic activity and decision-making so that all economic costs and benefits are considered when allocating resources. In this future, companies and investors will be transparent about and accountable for their impact in a meaningful way, and it will be the norm and expectation for investment decisions to be taken through the triple lens of risk, return, and impact. As the evidence for alternative approaches grows and the negative consequences of business as usual become increasingly apparent, perceptions of fiduciary duty will also evolve. Asset owners will demand more positive impact, recognizing its growing contribution to risk-adjusted returns. In response, the market will reassess company valuations, favoring those that deliver the best impacts and profits. To help engineer this shift, we propose two levers of change. Lever 1, impact transparency. We address the problem of companies' historic failure to account for their social and environmental impact meaningfully, because what is not measured consistently is not managed or valued by markets. It is difficult to make change if you do not know what to change. We presented a roadmap for long-term systemic change aimed at transforming the quality and transparency of information available to investors and the impact of their decisions. We were one of the first to argue that this process needs to be genuinely inclusive and understand the different contexts and needs for SMEs and EMDEs. The destination we pointed to demands mandatory accounting for impact by businesses and investors. We also called for cooperation in developing a credible methodology to put a monetary value on impacts. The ability to make meaningful comparisons between the economic, social, and environmental value companies create or destroy will transform our ability to hold leadership to account. Moreover, putting a monetary value on impacts through robust methodology will have profound implications for corporate branding, cost of capital, and enterprise value. The further we go down this road to impact transparency, the faster behaviour will change. Lever 2, capital mobilisation. We tackled the challenge of the perceived lack of high-impact investment opportunities that meet the risk-adjusted return expectations of major institutional investors. There is an urgent need to build a track record that demonstrates the ability to combine positive impact with satisfactory returns. We argued for short-term interventions that would transform the supply side and help catalyze these opportunities, which included subordinated capital, guarantees, insurance, securitization, local currency funding, among other existing tools. In EMDEs, where the impact and risk are greatest, new models of public-private collaboration need to develop into blueprints to enable different types of capital to collaborate, blend and deploy for impact, catalyzing on the deployment of integrated national financing frameworks, or NIFFs, and adding to the demonstration effect. Given the primacy of private capital mobilization, we were also early advocates of converting the principle of a just transition into a practical framework for the development and implementation of public and private investment. We made it clear that the framework needed to integrate social and environmental objectives as well as community participation to make sure that these people and places were not left behind in the challenging transition to net zero. The two agendas are linked by the need for the new world of sustainability disclosure and impact transparency to meet the data and information need of investors in a way that is useful, actionable and understands local context. This will help address one of the most cited barriers to the flow of institutional investment for impact, especially in EMDEs. Our call to action recognised the heavy drag of systemic inertia as a barrier to the structural transformation of the global socio-economic system. However, we also identified three powerful tailwinds of change pushing our impact agenda forward. The first is a shift in the social values and expectations of the private sector's most important stakeholders, consumers, talent, investors, and policymakers. We expect this shift to accelerate over the next 25 years as we see the biggest intergenerational transfer of wealth in our history. An estimated $100 trillion will be transferred from the baby boomer generation to people born after 1980, whose different values and priorities are likely to reshape what corporate and investment success look like. The second tailwind is the growing realization that while the transition to net zero carries systemic risk, it also presents one of the biggest wealth creation opportunities in our history. Over 90% of the global economy is committed to achieving net zero, with all it entails across nearly all economic systems. The third tailwind is the potential of the huge leaps in technology, including artificial intelligence, to create new profitable opportunities for investment at scale in global fast-growing markets that can leapfrog legacy systems in key sectors such as health, education, financial services, transport, food chains, and renewable energies. Examples are available in the portfolio of ITF member leapfrog investments, including Healthify Me, Good Life, and D-Light. Other examples include Box, which over a period of 10 years has built a data-driven super platform to connect over 2 million unserved consumers across Africa to essential products like clean electricity, clean cooking, smartphones, and e-mobility. Many other examples could have been selected across a number of sectors and geographies. This major investment opportunity in disruptive technology brings with it the opportunity to generate more efficient ways of delivering and measuring improved social and economic outcomes, as well as the obligation to use the technology responsibly, adhering to local regulations and global best practices. GSG and partners have conducted groundbreaking research for Horizon EU on emerging best practices in 6 EU countries, fostering crucial ecosystems of support for SDG-driven technological innovation. Summary. Point 1. Over the next 25 years, an estimated $100 trillion will be transferred to people born after the year 1980. Point 2. Over 90% of the global economy is committed to net zero. Point 3. New technology generates more efficient ways of delivering and measuring outcomes. That concludes the first chapter of the ITF State of Play report for 2023. The next chapter is Chapter 2, Progress Update on Impact Transparency, and that will be the next episode of this podcast and YouTube channel, Readings in Impact Investing. If you found this useful, please do consider sharing this link along with any colleagues interested in the world of impact investing, and thank you for listening.